I never imagined the first time my parents would truly acknowledge me as part of the family would be at their 30th wedding anniversary dinner, and it wasn't out of love or pride. It was because they expected me to foot the bill for a celebration I barely got to attend. Sit back, relax, and stay with me until the very end of this story. What started as a night meant to honor my parents turned into the moment I realized just how little I mattered to them beyond what I could provide. My name is Olivia Parker. I'm 34 years old, and I've spent my adult life carving out a modest but independent path as a freelance graphic designer in Brooklyn. From the outside, my family looks like the picture of success. My father, Richard, manages a bank in Manhattan and carries himself with an air of authority, always immaculate in suits that cost more than I'd ever dream of spending. My mother, Margaret, has spent decades as a corporate accountant, precise and practical to her core. And then there's my older sister, Victoria, an Ivy League graduate turned high-powered attorney, married to a surgeon, with two photogenic kids who already seem destined for prep school and Ivy League futures of their own. They are the Parkers, polished, accomplished, enviable. And then there's me, the creative one, the outlier, the so-called free spirit who chose art school over law or business. I rent a small apartment in Williamsburg, work gigs that range from feast to famine, and chase inspiration through the streets of New York. I have no husband, no children, no corporate title to flaunt at holiday dinners. To my parents, my work has always been nice, but not serious. My sister's courtroom victories and corner office made her the golden child. My digital art, my designs displayed in small galleries, my freelance contracts, those were just hobbies in their eyes. Family dinners growing up felt less like meals and more like performance reviews. Victoria's straight A's and debate trophies were met with praise and admiration. My B+ in math was met with a sigh and the inevitable, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Even when I achieved something in my own lane, like winning an art competition or having my work featured locally, it was brushed off with comments like, "That's wonderful, Olivia. But what about something stable to fall back on?" It was a script I knew by heart, one that carved me into the role of the outsider in a family obsessed with achievement and appearances. The truth is, I spent years trying to earn their approval. I told myself if I worked harder, achieved more, maybe even made real money from my art, they'd finally see me as worthy. But every accomplishment of mine seemed invisible next to my sister's perfect resume and her perfect family. At times, I felt like a shadow in my own home, useful only as a contrast to highlight how brightly Victoria shone. Maybe that's why, when I stumbled into unexpected good fortune a few years ago, I thought things might finally change. For once, I had something concrete, something undeniable to prove my value in their language of numbers and status. But as I would soon learn, what I believed could bring me closer to my family was the very thing that exposed the painful truth. In their eyes, I wasn't a daughter or a sister to be cherished. I was becoming a resource to be used. And that realization began long before the anniversary dinner, long before the torn restaurant bill. It began the moment I shared my secret with them, the secret that should have been a blessing, but instead became the very chain that bound me to years of manipulation and disappointment. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? Like no matter what you do, you'll never measure up? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear if you've ever experienced something similar. And if you're just as curious as I was about how this story unfolds, make sure you like this video, subscribe for more family stories, and stay with me. Because what happened after I revealed my secret would change everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning in Brooklyn, the kind where the subway rattled in the distance and the smell of bagels drifted through the air. I had gone into the corner deli for coffee, tired and slightly hungover from working late the night before on a client's rushed logo project. On a whim, maybe boredom, maybe the faint thrill of a gamble, I slid a couple of crumpled bills across the counter for a lottery ticket. I rarely bought them. I wasn't that kind of person. My life wasn't built on chances, it was built on hustling for every freelance contract I could get. But something inside me said, Why not? A few days later, I stood in my kitchen in the morning light, hair unwashed, holding that same ticket against the numbers scrolling on my laptop screen. My coffee went cold as I counted and recounted the digits, heart pounding louder with each confirmation. I had won. Not millions, but $200,000. For someone like me, it may as well have been a lifetime of freedom. I fell into a chair, laughing and crying at the same time, my hands shaking so badly I nearly spilled coffee on the ticket. 200,000. Enough to pay off my student loans in one swift move. Enough to replace my old laptop with equipment worthy of the designs I wanted to create. Enough to put away savings so I wouldn't panic every month about whether rent was covered. Enough to breathe. For the first time since college, I felt a strange kind of security, a foundation I had built on sheer luck. And for a brief moment, I felt like maybe this would be the turning point not just for my career, but for how my family saw me. I told myself I would keep it private, at least for a while. I wasn't naive. I knew money changed things. I wanted the freedom without the complications. But when my parents asked over dinner why I seemed calmer lately, why I wasn't panicking over every dollar, I slipped. I mentioned the lottery. I didn't brag. I didn't flaunt it, just came out, like a secret I couldn't quite hold in. The silence that followed was heavy. My father leaned back, brows arched, as if calculating something behind his steady gaze. My mother's lips parted in surprise, and then a flicker of relief crossed her face. Victoria, my sister, narrowed her eyes in a way I couldn't read. For a moment, I thought maybe they were proud of me, maybe happy for me. But what I saw in their eyes wasn't pride, it was opportunity. At first, it was subtle. My father called me one afternoon, sounding more sheepish than usual. His car had broken down unexpectedly. He didn't want to bother me, but he was in a bind. "Just a small loan, Liv," he said. "I'll pay you back after my year-end bonus. You know I always take care of my family. $7,000. I wired it to him, swallowing my discomfort. Weeks later, his bonus came and went. No repayment. When I asked about it gently, his expression turned cold. "We paid for your college," he reminded me. "Family helps family." Then Victoria called. Emma, my niece, had been invited to an exclusive summer program for gifted children. $4,000. "It would mean so much to her," Victoria said, her voice dripping with practiced guilt. "And it's not like you have kids to spend on." I hesitated, but eventually caved, convincing myself that giving my niece an opportunity was worth it. Not long after, my mother mentioned casually that the kitchen needed renovation. She'd been dreaming of new appliances for years. "You've always had such good taste," she said sweetly, sliding a brochure across the table. It wasn't a request, not directly, but the implication was clear. Then came my brother-in-law with his business venture, my nephew with his computer for school. Each time, the sums grew larger. Each time, the tone became less of a request and more of an expectation. I tried to remind myself that family is about supporting each other. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Their affection had strings now, their attention tied to the size of my wallet. When I provided, I was suddenly included, added to group texts, invited to weekly dinners, given the illusion of belonging. But when I tried to share something of my own, a design win, a gallery showing, it was met with polite nods before the conversation shifted back to who needed what next. The worst part wasn't the money itself, it was the realization that I had never truly been seen. They hadn't suddenly decided I was worthy of their attention. They had decided I was useful. Every hug felt staged, every thank you hollow, every inclusion conditional. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was being too sensitive. But then came Christmas. I spent weeks picking out meaningful gifts, things I thought they'd cherish. A diamond bracelet for my mother, expensive noise-canceling headphones for my father, high-end toys for my niece and nephew. I watched their faces light up as they tore through wrapping paper. For a fleeting moment, I felt the warmth of being part of something real. But then my sister smirked and handed me a scarf from a discount rack, saying, "We didn't know what to get you." The contrast was stark. I had poured myself into those gifts, into buying their affection, and they had given me scraps in return. It was in those moments I began to see the truth. My role wasn't daughter, sister, or aunt. My role was provider, benefactor, the family ATM. And once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. The guilt gnawed at me whenever I hesitated to give. They reminded me that I was single, childless, that my money had nowhere else to go. "At least it's going to good use," my mother would say, smiling faintly, as though draining me dry was some noble redistribution. And each time, I gave in. Not because I wanted to, but because I was still that little girl desperate for approval, still hoping that if I gave enough, they would finally look at me with love that wasn't laced with conditions. I started to wonder how far it would go. Would they expect me to fund vacations, pay off mortgages, cover debts they wouldn't even admit existed? And if I said no, would the warmth I'd been shown disappear again? I knew the answer before the question was fully formed. The warmth wasn't real. It wasn't love. It was access. And access depended on how open my wallet was. And so, what should have been my moment of triumph, winning enough money to change my own life, turned into a slow unraveling of illusions. What began as joy became entanglement. What felt like freedom became another form of captivity. The very thing I thought would make me feel closer to my family was the thing that revealed just how far apart we truly were. I had no idea then that the breaking point was still coming, that a single dinner in Manhattan would tear away the last shred of denial I clung to. But looking back, I can see that the seeds were planted here, in the subtle shift of their smiles, in the way their voices softened only when a request was about to follow. Because the night of their 30th anniversary wasn't just about food, wine, or even celebration. It was the culmination of everything that had been building since the day I scratched off those lottery numbers in my kitchen. And by the time I walked into that restaurant, late and dripping from the rain, the truth was waiting for me at the table like an uninvited guest. The night of my parents' 30th anniversary should have been a celebration, a rare moment of togetherness that could have softened years of tension. I had spent weeks preparing, telling myself that if I did everything right, if I chose the perfect gift, the perfect dress, the perfect words maybe, just maybe, this night could be the turning point for our fractured dynamic. I wanted so badly to believe that love could still be restored if I proved myself worthy enough. I had chosen matching Apple Watches, sleek and modern, their backs engraved with my parents' wedding date. I'd even set up their favorite apps, fitness trackers, and alerts so they wouldn't have to lift a finger. I wrapped them in silver paper, tied them with a satin ribbon, and wrote heartfelt cards expressing how much I admired their 30 years together. For days I practiced a short toast in the mirror, rehearsing how I would stand, smile, and finally say the words I hoped would bridge the gap between us. I bought a navy blue dress that cost more than I'd ever dared spend before, tailored to fit just right. Every detail mattered. But New York had other plans. That night, the skies opened up. Sheets of rain slammed against my windshield as I inched along the West Side Highway. Sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights cutting through the fog of water and brake lights. A 3-car pileup had brought traffic to a standstill. I sat gripping the steering wheel, watching the digital clock on the dashboard march forward minute by minute. My stomach twisted with dread. I called my mother. No answer. My father. Straight to voicemail. Victoria. Nothing. I sent a desperate text to the family group chat. Stuck in traffic. There's been an accident. I'll be late, but I'm on my way. The little checkmark showed it delivered. No one read it. By the time I reached Per Se, I was nearly an hour late. My umbrella turned inside out as the wind whipped through Columbus Circle, leaving my hair frizzed and damp despite my careful preparation. I walked through the gleaming glass doors, the maitre d' offering me a polite but knowing smile. The Parker party? Yes, they're in the private dining room. They've already been served the main course. My heart dropped. The sound of laughter greeted me as I pushed open the door to the lakeside room. For a moment, I stood frozen at the threshold, clutching my carefully wrapped gift bag. My family was gathered around the long, white linen table, dessert plates nearly empty, wine glasses half full, forks clinking against china. My father poured more wine. My niece giggled at something my brother-in-law said. Not one person looked up until my nephew noticed me and muttered, "Oh, Aunt Liv is here," with the same enthusiasm one might use to announce the weather. Heads turned. My mother's expression shifted from laughter to cool acknowledgement. "Well, look who finally decided to join us," she said. "We thought you might not come at all." Not a word of worry, not a trace of relief, only accusation wrapped in feigned civility. "There was an accident on the highway," I explained, still standing awkwardly in the doorway. "I tried calling everyone." "We were enjoying ourselves," Victoria said, her voice smooth with superiority. "Phones away during family dinner. Dad's rule, remember?" The irony burned. I had watched her check work emails at countless dinners, but suddenly the rule applied when it was convenient. My father gestured to the only empty chair. "Sit down. We'll see if the kitchen can bring you something quickly." I slid into the seat, noticing the empty bread basket, the drained water glasses. Not one person had saved me an appetizer, even though I had ordered the same truffle pasta for years. My stomach growled, but pride forced me to wave it off. "No need to trouble the kitchen, I'm just glad I made it." I forced a smile, though my chest felt tight. Trying to salvage the evening, I reached into my bag and pulled out the silver-wrapped box. "Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad. 30 years is something to celebrate." My mother took the box with a polite, "Thank you," and placed it beside her without opening it. The silence was awkward until my aunt murmured, "Shouldn't we see what Olivia brought?" "Oh, of course," my mother said, as if the thought had only just occurred to her. She unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing the 2 watches. My father lifted one, admiring the sleek band. "These are very nice," he said. "They're the newest models," I added quickly, eager for approval. "I had them engraved with your wedding date, and they're already set up with your favorite fitness apps." "That's thoughtful," my mother said, closing the box and setting it aside almost immediately. The fleeting moment of appreciation evaporated, leaving only silence. "Wait until you see what Victoria and Andrew got them," Emma piped up, eyes shining. My sister smiled smugly as she handed our parents an envelope. Inside were details of a week-long trip to Hawaii, complete with first-class tickets and a beachfront suite at the Four Seasons. The reaction was instant. My mother's eyes filled with tears. She stood, embracing my sister and brother-in-law. "This is incredible! You know how much we love Maui." My father clapped Andrew on the back, his voice booming with excitement. For the next 15 minutes the table buzzed with talk of beaches, luau's, and spa treatments. My gift sat untouched on the side table, forgotten as though it had never existed. The sting of being dismissed so easily clawed at my chest, but the final blow came moments later. My mother reached into her purse and unfolded a sheet of paper, the bill. She smoothed it flat on the tablecloth, then slid it toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We thought you might like to take care of this, Olivia. Since you missed most of dinner, it would be a nice way to contribute." I stared at the bottom of the page. Over $1,000. My heart pounded in my ears. "You want me to pay for a dinner I barely attended?" "Well, we did reserve a place for you," my father said matter-of-factly. "The restaurant charges per head. And it's not like you have other expenses," my mother added. "No children, no mortgage." Victoria laughed, her voice sharp as glass. "Come on, Liv. Don't act surprised. You've always been our family ATM." The table erupted in laughter, forks tapping against plates, glasses raised in mock toasts. Even the children joined in, though they couldn't possibly understand the cruelty of the joke. My brother-in-law lifted his wine glass. "To Olivia's good fortune, which we all get to enjoy." More laughter followed, filling the room with a sound that cut deeper than any silence ever could. I sat frozen, my vision blurring with tears I refused to shed in front of them. The bill on the table blurred into meaningless numbers as years of buried moments came rushing back. The loans never repaid, the vacations I had subsidized, the subtle digs about my choices, the way my love had been measured only in dollars. Something inside me shifted. My hands no longer shook. With deliberate calm, I picked up the bill and held it between both hands. Slowly, deliberately, I tore it in half, then in quarters, then into smaller and smaller pieces until the white tablecloth was scattered with confetti of what they had tried to demand from me. Gasps filled the room. My mother's face hardened. "Olivia, what do you think you're doing?" I met her eyes. "Steady now. I'm done being the family bank." I reached into my purse, pulled out 3 crisp $100 bills, and placed them on the table. "This covers my share. The rest is on you." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's jaw clenched. My sister rolled her eyes. My brother-in-law smirked. My mother looked at me as though she barely recognized the daughter sitting in front of her. I stood, smoothing the fabric of my dress, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of my family's expectations fall away. Not replaced by joy, not yet, but by something stronger: resolve. I turned toward the door, my heels clicking against the polished floor. My father's voice followed me, sharp and commanding. "Olivia Parker, you get back here right now. We're not finished discussing this." But I knew we were. And as I walked out into the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, I felt a strange mixture of heaviness and liberation. Heavy with the knowledge of what I had just done. Light with the realization that I had finally said no. I didn't yet know how my family would respond in the days that followed. I didn't know that this night would be the beginning of a silence deeper than any I had ever experienced. But I did know this. The girl who had walked into Per Se desperate for approval wasn't the same woman who walked out. And what came next would test that resolve in ways I could never have imagined. The days after the anniversary dinner were strangely quiet. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't buzzing with group chat notifications or casual family updates. No one reached out to ask if I had made it home safely, or to check if I was okay. At first, I told myself they were giving me space after the scene I had caused, that maybe they were embarrassed or unsure of how to approach me. But as hours turned into days, and days into weeks, I realized the silence was intentional. They weren't worried about me, they were waiting for me to come crawling back, apologizing, wallet in hand. The silence was both excruciating and liberating. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of that dinner. The look on my mother's face when I tore the bill. The laughter that followed Victoria's cruel family ATM joke. The way my father barked my full name as though I were a child to be scolded. Doubt gnawed at me. Had I gone too far? Was I childish to rip up the check instead of just saying no? The guilt I had been conditioned to carry whispered that I had overreacted, that I should have swallowed the humiliation for the sake of keeping the peace. But then, another voice would cut through the one I had buried for years. That voice said, "No, Olivia, you finally stood up for yourself." The hardest part was the loneliness. For all their faults, my family had been a constant presence in my life. Even if the texts were requests for money or thinly veiled manipulations, they still filled the silence. Now, my phone sat idle on the table, screen dark, no new messages. I tried to distract myself with work, burying my head in client projects, but the ache of absence lingered. And then, slowly, the silence cracked. My mother left me a voicemail one afternoon, her tone sugary sweet. "Olivia, darling, your father and I are thinking of renovating the kitchen at the lake house. Since you have such good taste, we thought you might want to contribute to the new appliances. Call me back, sweetheart." There it was, the first thread of the old pattern pulling tight again. Not an apology, not a question of how I was holding up, just another ask. A day later, Victoria texted me. "Emma's birthday is next month. She really wants that drawing tablet you mentioned once. I told her Aunt Liv would probably get it for her. Let me know when you order it." As though my role had been assigned without my consent, as though saying no wasn't even an option. Then came my father's message, blunt and unapologetic. "The Hawaii trip is coming up. Your mother thought you might want to send us some spending money as an anniversary gift since you ruined dinner." Think about it. Reading those words was like being punched in the chest. Even after everything, after I had walked away, they still didn't see me. They didn't care that I was hurt, or angry, or done. They only cared about what I could give. That was when I realized I couldn't do this alone anymore. The cycle was too deeply ingrained, the guilt too heavy. I made an appointment with a therapist, Dr. Elaine Matthews, who specialized in family dynamics and boundary setting. Walking into her office for the first time felt like walking into uncharted territory. I had never spoken openly about my family to a stranger before. But Dr. Matthews had a way of listening that made me feel safe, like the words I had always swallowed finally had a place to land. "What you're experiencing is grief," she told me one session after I broke down describing the dinner. "Not just grief for the relationship you've lost, but for the relationship you never had and always longed for." Those words pierced through me. I had been mourning all along, I just hadn't named it. I wasn't only grieving the current silence, I was grieving every birthday where my gift went unnoticed, every holiday where my efforts fell short, every moment I had begged silently to be seen and wasn't. Dr. Matthews helped me see the difference between guilt and responsibility. She explained how my family had used guilt as a weapon, twisting it until I believed setting boundaries made me selfish. But true responsibility wasn't about giving endlessly until I was empty. It was about protecting my own well-being. That realization cracked something open inside me. For the first time, I saw that saying no wasn't cruelty. It was survival. Around the same time, I joined the Brooklyn Art Collective, a community of artists who met weekly to share work and support one another. For years, I had felt my art was invisible in the shadow of my sister's achievements. But here, surrounded by painters, photographers, and designers, I felt valued for what I created, not what I could provide. That's where I met Grace Liu, a photographer who had moved from Chicago. Over late-night coffees after meetings, I told her pieces of my story, bracing for judgment or empty platitudes. Instead, she nodded knowingly. "My parents tried to control me with money too," she said. "They paid for college, but only on the condition that I study business instead of photography. When I changed my major, they cut me off completely. No warning, no discussion, just gone." Her calm recounting of something so brutal stunned me. "What did you do?" I asked. "I worked 3 jobs, took out loans, and finished anyway. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most freeing. Because I learned their money was never really support, it was leverage. It was control." Her words resonated deep in my bones. For the first time, I didn't feel crazy or alone. Grace understood the complicated tangle of love, obligation, and manipulation that had defined my life. She reminded me that family bonds aren't automatically healthy just because they're blood. As the weeks passed, I began to feel stronger. The constant messages from my family requests, dressed as casual notes, didn't sting as much. I could see them for what they were, attempts to pull me back into the old script. Dr. Matthews gave me exercises to practice, small ways of reclaiming my sense of worth. Grace gave me solidarity, living proof that breaking free was possible. But that didn't mean the guilt vanished. Late at night, when the city outside my window hummed with sirens and laughter, doubts crept in. Was I cruel for pulling away? Was I heartless for ignoring my mother's voicemails, my sister's texts, my father's demands? The conditioning ran deep, and in those quiet moments, I almost gave in. Almost. Then, I'd remember the look on their faces at per se. The laughter when my sister called me the ATM. The bills sliding across the table as though I were nothing more than a credit card with legs. Those memories became my anchor, the reminder of why I had to stay firm. Still, there were moments I couldn't shake the ache of absence. Holidays passed, and while other families filled restaurants and parks with laughter, I sat alone, sipping coffee and pretending it didn't matter. It did matter. It mattered deeply. But I told myself I'd rather sit in clean loneliness than in the suffocating embrace of conditional love. 3 months after the dinner, the messages slowed. Maybe they had grown tired of my silence. Maybe they had found someone else to lean on. Whatever the reason, the quiet gave me room to breathe, to rebuild, to see myself not as their provider but as my own person. What I didn't know was that the silence was only temporary. Because just as I began to believe I was free, just as I started to piece myself back together, my phone rang with a call that would rip the ground from under me once again. It wasn't my mother, or my sister, or even my father. It was a stranger from a bank, and his words would change everything I thought I knew about betrayal. It was a gray Tuesday morning when the call came, the kind of morning where the city felt muted, the sidewalks slick from overnight rain, the air heavy with the smell of damp concrete. I was sitting at my desk in my apartment, sketching concepts for a new branding project, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Normally I'd ignore it, let it go to voicemail, but something in me hesitated. I picked up, expecting maybe a telemarketer or a client referral. What I heard instead made my stomach lurch. "Good morning, is this Olivia Parker?" The voice was crisp, professional, with a weight behind it that immediately put me on edge. "Yes, this is she. My name is Thomas Brennan. I'm a senior credit manager with First Security Bank. I need to speak with you regarding unusual activity tied to your personal information. Do you have a few minutes to discuss this privately?" Every muscle in my body went rigid. My first thought was fraud. Maybe a stranger halfway across the world trying to open accounts in my name. I swallowed hard. "Yes, I have time. What's going on?" There was a pause before he continued, his voice gentler now, as though bracing me. "Our system flagged an application submitted last Thursday for a new credit line, $25,000. The application included your social security number, date of birth, and what appears to be a copy of your driver's license. But certain details didn't match, which triggered our fraud protocols." My throat went dry. "I didn't apply for anything. Someone must have stolen my identity." "That was our initial assumption," he said. "But during our verification process, we contacted the listed primary applicant, a man named Richard Parker. He identified himself as your father." The world seemed to tilt sideways. My own father? I pressed my hand to my forehead, the room spinning around me. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "Richard Parker," he repeated. "He attempted to open a joint line of credit under both your names. When questioned, he insisted it was legitimate and that you had authorized it. However, the signature provided did not pass our verification process, and the documents raised red flags. My father, my own father, had tried to steal from me. It was like a knife sliding between my ribs, twisting deeper with every detail. I forced myself to ask the next question, though my voice trembled. Was this the first time? There was another pause, careful, measured. "I cannot share specific applications from other institutions, but our system indicates multiple recent inquiries in your name from various banks over the past 2 months. It's possible this wasn't the only attempt." I felt my chest tighten, panic rising like a wave. This wasn't a one-time mistake, a desperate lapse in judgment. It was a pattern, a campaign. My father had been using my identity like a credit card, applying again and again, hoping something would slip through. I barely heard the rest of what Mr. Brennan said as he explained the next steps. Fraud alerts. Freezing my credit with all 3 bureaus. Monitoring my accounts daily. Changing every password, every security question. Filing a police report if I chose. His voice was calm, steady, but my mind was a storm. When the call ended, I sat there, motionless, staring at my hands. They were shaking. I tried to process what had just happened, but the betrayal was too large to fit into my chest. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about the fundamental bond between a parent and a child. I thought back to every time my father had looked me in the eye and told me family was about support, every time he had justified not repaying me with the phrase, "family helps family." Now I saw it clearly. He had never meant support in both directions. To him, I was nothing more than a resource to be mined. I remembered the last time I had been at their house months earlier, bringing along a folder with my social security card and driver's license to update my health insurance paperwork. I'd left it in the study for just a few minutes while I helped my mother in the kitchen. The realization made me sick to my stomach. Had he gone through my things? Had he quietly copied documents that should never have left my possession? I pressed my fists against my eyes, but the tears still came. Anger, grief, disbelief, they crashed over me in waves. What kind of father steals his daughter's identity? What kind of father risks her future for his own desperation? When the tears finally slowed, a cold clarity set in. I couldn't pretend anymore. The anniversary dinner had exposed how little my family valued me beyond money. But this was proof that they were willing to cross into criminal betrayal. It was no longer about conditional affection or guilt-tripping. It was about survival. I had to protect myself. I spent the rest of the day on the phone. Equifax, TransUnion, Experian. I froze my credit, placed fraud alerts, updated passwords on every account I owned. I scheduled an appointment to open a P.O. box so my mail wouldn't even touch my apartment building's shared lobby. Each step felt like laying bricks around myself, building a fortress I hadn't realized I needed against the people who were supposed to protect me. But the hardest part wasn't the logistical battle. It was knowing I had to confront them. My instinct was to drive to their house, to scream, to demand explanations, but I knew better. Face to face, I would be drowned in excuses, tears, manipulations designed to twist the story until I doubted my own reality again. So instead, I wrote. I sat at my desk late into the night, pouring everything into an email that shook as I typed. I have discovered that Dad attempted to commit identity theft by opening credit accounts in my name without my consent. This is not only a profound betrayal of trust but a criminal act. While I have chosen not to press charges for now, I need you all to understand that this crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. I am implementing complete financial protection measures and will have no further contact with anyone who minimizes, excuses, or enables this behavior. I sent it to my parents, my sister, my aunt. Then I sat back, the silence in the apartment pressing in on me like a weight. The responses came quickly, just as I feared. Victoria wrote first, her words laced with anger. You're exaggerating. Dad would never do that to you. Why are you trying to destroy this family over a misunderstanding? My Aunt Caroline's email was more measured, but equally dismissive. This is shocking, but maybe there's a way to work it out quietly. Families go through difficult times. Try to keep the peace. But my father sent nothing. No denial, no apology. Just silence. And in some ways, that silence said more than words ever could. Then there was my mother. She didn't reply to the email immediately. 3 days later, my phone rang with her name on the screen. For a long moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something in me, curiosity, maybe a flicker of hope, made me answer. Her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. Olivia, she said, can we meet? Just you and me, please. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone. Against every instinct, I agreed. I didn't know what she would say. I didn't know if it would be another attempt to pull me back in, another layer of manipulation disguised as motherly concern. But I did know this. The truth was finally unraveling, and I had no choice but to face it head on. I could never have imagined, though, that what she confessed in that cafe would make my father's betrayal look like just one thread in a web of secrets I had never seen coming. I agreed to meet her against my better judgment. Every instinct told me it would be another ambush, another carefully staged moment, designed to reel me back into the same toxic cycle I had worked so hard to escape. But there was something different in her voice on the phone, something I had never heard before. Not command, not guilt, not icy disappointment. It was smaller, fragile, almost desperate. Curiosity won out. I told myself I'd meet her on my terms, in public, where I could leave the moment it turned sour. I arrived at the cafe near Central Park early, choosing a table by the window with a clear view of the exit. I ordered a latte I had no intention of drinking, my hands curled tight around the warm cup as though it might anchor me. My chest buzzed with nerves, my mind rehearsing every possible outcome. Would she deny everything? Would she beg me to protect the family name? Would she try to gaslight me into believing I had misunderstood? When the door opened and my mother walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked smaller somehow, her usually impeccable appearance unraveling at the edges. Her hair, always perfectly styled, was hastily pulled back. Her tailored coat hung loose on her frame, and her eyes, once sharp, calculating, looked heavy, ringed with exhaustion. For a fleeting moment, I saw not the formidable woman who had held my childhood in a vice grip of expectations, but someone weathered, fragile, undone. She spotted me immediately and walked over, hesitating before sliding into the seat across from mine. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice low, her fingers fumbling with the napkin in front of her. "I know you had every reason not to." I stayed silent. I had no intention of making this easy. She cleared her throat, forcing herself to meet my gaze. "What your father did was wrong," she began. "I want you to know that I had no idea he was trying to use your information. I would never have condoned that." The anger rose in me instantly, sharp and unyielding. "But you condoned years of treating me like a bank account," I snapped. "You encouraged it. You laughed about it at that dinner, remember?" She flinched, her shoulders curling inward. For once, she didn't argue. "You're right," she whispered. "I did. We all did. And I am sorry, Olivia. I am truly sorry." The words hit me like a wave, disorienting. My mother had apologized before in my life, but never like this. Her apologies had always been transactional, hedged with excuses, or barbed with subtle blame. This one sounded naked, stripped of pretense. I wanted to reject it, to scoff, but something about the way her hands trembled as she clutched that napkin made me pause. "There's something you don't know," she continued. "Something I've hidden for years because it was easier than facing it. Your father has a problem, a gambling problem. It's been going on longer than you realize." I told myself it was under control, that it was just a phase, that he'd stop once he got it out of his system. But it only grew worse. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I watched her swallow hard, as though the confession itself had cut her. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "The vacations, the renovations, the image we maintained, it was all built on sand. We remortgaged the house twice, maxed out credit cards. I lied to myself and to everyone else because I couldn't bear the shame. And when you won that money, Olivia, we saw it as salvation. We saw you as salvation." Her words rang in my ears like a confession at the edge of a cliff. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. The constant requests, the way they never stopped to ask how I was doing, the subtle pressure to give it wasn't just entitlement, it was desperation. My father's addiction had hollowed out the family's stability, and they had turned to me to plug the hole. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout at her for dragging me into their mess without my consent, for turning my small piece of luck into a lifeline for a sinking ship. But instead, I sat there, shaking, my latte cooling untouched between us. "So what?" I asked finally, my voice raw. "You expect me to forgive him because he's an addict? You expect me to bail you out because you chose denial?" "No," she said firmly, surprising me. "I'm not here to ask for money. I know better now. I came because you deserve the truth, and because I owe you an apology for every time we measured your worth by the wrong things." For the first time in my life, tears filled my mother's eyes and didn't look staged. They weren't part of a performance to manipulate or control. They looked real, heavy, devastating. "I've joined a support group," she added softly. "Families of people with gambling addiction. I'm learning about codependency, about enabling. I see now how I failed you, how I failed all of us. I can't undo the damage, but I can try to change moving forward. I don't expect forgiveness. I needed you to know." Her words cracked something inside me. For years, I had begged silently for her to see me not as a disappointment, not as a resource, but as her daughter. And now, sitting across from me in that crowded cafe, she finally did. It didn't erase the pain, but it lit a fragile spark of possibility. Still, I knew what I had to say. "I can have a relationship with you, Mom, but it has to be different. There will be no money. None. That boundary is non-negotiable. If you want me in your life, it has to be because of who I am, not what I can provide." She nodded. A small, shaky movement. I understand. And Dad? I asked, my stomach twisting. Her face crumpled. He's not ready. I've tried to convince him to get help, but he denies it, lashes out. He's drowning, Olivia, and he's dragging everyone down with him. Until he chooses differently, there's nothing anyone can do. My heart ached, but I stayed firm. Then I can't have contact with him. Not after what he did. He stole from me, Mom. He violated my trust in a way that may never be repairable. If he ever gets help, if he ever takes responsibility, maybe I'll reconsider. But not now. She nodded again, her tears falling silently onto the napkin she still clutched. We sat there for nearly 2 hours, unraveling decades of silence, comparison, and denial. For once, she listened more than she spoke. For once, she didn't defend or deflect. She simply let the truth hang between us like fragile glass. As I left the cafe, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity. My mother's confession had changed everything, not just how I saw my father, but how I understood my entire family dynamic. The polished image I had grown up chasing had been a facade, a house of cards built on debt, denial, and addiction. And I was done being the glue that held it together. But even as I walked away, I knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of something even harder. Because confessions, no matter how honest, don't erase the wreckage. And the path forward, if there even was one, would demand more strength than I had ever needed before. And soon enough, I would be tested again, not just by my parents' unraveling, but by the choices I'd have to make about what kind of daughter, what kind of sister, what kind of person I wanted to be when the next storm hit. A year feels like both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. When I look back on that night at Per Se, the rain dripping from my hair as I tore the bill into pieces, it feels like a memory belonging to someone else. Yet the sting of it, the laughter, the cruel jokes, the realization of what I truly was to them still lives under my skin. A year later, the pain hasn't vanished, but it has transformed. What was once raw and bleeding has hardened into something steadier, something I can stand on. I moved last spring, leaving behind the Williamsburg apartment that carried too many echoes of late nights, replaying every word my family had thrown at me. My new place is a loft, tucked in a quieter part of Brooklyn, with tall windows that flood the space with light in the mornings. For the first time in years, I decorated for myself, not to impress visitors, not to stage an image, but to create a sanctuary. Plants line the windowsills, a messy stack of sketchbooks claims the coffee table, and on the far wall hangs my proudest piece. A digital mural I designed for a local nonprofit that became a small symbol of hope in the community. This place feels like mine in a way no space ever has before. My work has grown too. Without the constant drain of emotional and financial obligation, I've poured myself into projects that matter. The contracts I once took just to keep the lights on have given way to collaborations that challenge and inspire me. A tech company hired me to design a global branding campaign. An art collective in Brooklyn invited me to join a residency, where I spent 3 months exploring ideas I'd buried in favor of paying gigs. For the first time, I feel like an artist, rather than a freelancer surviving from project to project. I built a reputation, not because I caved to every demand, but because I finally gave myself permission to choose. Yet, success doesn't erase the complicated weight of family. My relationship with my mother is cautious, tentative, rebuilt brick by brick. We talk once a week, brief phone calls where she asks about my work, and I listen to her describe the support groups she still attends. There are moments when she slips, when old patterns resurface, when I hear the faintest edge of expectation in her tone. But I remind her of my boundaries, and to my surprise, she respects them. It's not the closeness I once longed for, but it's something real, something built on honesty, rather than performance. My father, on the other hand, is a ghost. I hear through my mother that he eventually entered treatment for his gambling addiction. Part of me wants to believe he is trying, that beneath the damage there is still a man who could someday make amends. But I keep my distance. I can't afford to gamble with my heart anymore. The wound of his betrayal is too deep, the memory of his silence after my email too loud. If he ever reaches out, it will have to be with accountability, not excuses. Until then, I hold the boundary. Victoria is harder to place. Months after my mother's confession, she sent me a clipped message. I still think you overreacted, but maybe we were a little thoughtless. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. It wasn't the apology I needed, but it was the closest she has ever come to acknowledging fault. Since then, our relationship has settled into a cold politeness. Holiday texts, the occasional photo of her children, obligatory small talk that skirts the truth. We orbit each other from a distance, bound by blood but separated by a gulf neither of us seems willing to cross. And then there's me. The me who walked into that restaurant a year ago was desperate, clinging to the hope that one perfect night could heal decades of wounds. The me who walks through life now is different. Stronger. Lonelier at times, yes, but the loneliness is clean, honest. It doesn't come with strings attached or laughter at my expense. It doesn't demand payment for the privilege of belonging. It simply exists, and I can live with that. Still, there are moments when the grief hits unexpectedly. Watching families laugh together in Central Park, overhearing siblings trading inside jokes on the subway, scrolling past social media posts of parents beaming with pride. In those moments, the ache of what I never had tugs at me, sharp and undeniable. Therapy has taught me to name it for what it is. Mourning. Mourning not just the loss of my family as they are, but the loss of the family I always dreamed they could be. But grief, I've learned, can coexist with growth. On the anniversary of that dinner, I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I took myself out to a fine restaurant. I reserved a table for one at Gramercy Tavern, ordered champagne, and let myself savor every bite of the meal. I didn't shrink under the gaze of couples or groups around me. I raised my glass in a private toast, whispering words only I could hear. To boundaries, to self-respect, to finally being enough for myself. That moment wasn't about triumph or revenge. It was about reclaiming something I had given away for too long, my worth. I realized then that my story wasn't just about betrayal and hurt. It was also about resilience. About learning that family doesn't have to mean blood. It can mean the community I've built in Brooklyn, the friends who show up without expecting repayment, the artists who value my voice, the people who see me not as a bank account but as Olivia, fully human and whole. As I walked home that night, the city alive with its endless hum, I thought about how far I had come. A year ago, I was drowning in guilt, desperate for scraps of affection. Now, I was learning to breathe on my own, even if the air sometimes felt sharp and cold. But life has a way of testing resolve just when you think you've found solid ground. I had no idea that while I was rebuilding, forces in my family were shifting too. Secrets unraveling, alliances fraying, consequences of choices made long ago finally clawing their way to the surface. And soon, I would be pulled back into the storm not as the same woman who once begged for acceptance, but as someone who finally knew the cost of silence and the power of saying no. When I look back at everything that has happened, the silence, the betrayal, the painful confessions, the slow process of rebuilding myself, I realize now that the story was never just about money. It was never just about being treated like an ATM or about torn bills scattered across a table. What this journey really taught me is that love without respect is not love at all, and family without boundaries can turn into a cage. For most of my life, I believed love had to be earned. I believed if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, proved myself enough, then I would finally be worthy. That belief kept me tethered to people who only saw me for what I could provide. It blinded me to the truth that love, real love, does not come with conditions or price tags. It doesn't demand repayment. It doesn't mock you for being different. It simply exists, freely given, freely received. Setting boundaries was the hardest lesson I have ever learned. At first, it felt cruel, almost unnatural, like I was betraying my own blood. But the more I practiced saying no, the more I understood something essential. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors. They don't shut people out, they show people the only way in. If someone cannot meet me with respect, honesty, and care, then they don't get access to me. It's that simple and that powerful. Another truth I discovered is that family can be chosen. I used to think blood was everything, that biology bound us together in ways nothing else could. But what I've found is that real family is made up of the people who see you, who cheer for you when you succeed, who comfort you when you fail, who don't measure your worth by what you hand over but by who you are. Friends, mentors, communities, those connections can be just as sacred, sometimes even more so, than the ones you are born into. If you're listening to my story, and you've felt the same weight, the suffocating guilt, the endless giving, the ache of not being enough, I want you to know this. You are not alone, and you are not selfish for setting boundaries. Protecting your heart, your time, and your energy is not cruelty, it is self-respect. And self-respect is the foundation of every healthy relationship you will ever have. For me, the greatest transformation came the moment I stopped asking, "What do I have to do for them to love me?" and started asking, "Do they love me as I am?" That single shift changed everything. It gave me permission to stop performing, stop proving, and start simply being. And here's the most surprising part. Once I stopped giving to earn love, I discovered love in unexpected places. In the friends who showed up when I was sick. In the creative community that celebrated my work. In the quiet strength I found in myself when no one else was around. That love was steady, unconditional, and real. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Love yourself enough to say no. Love yourself enough to walk away when respect is absent. Love yourself enough to believe you deserve more. Because you do. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If my story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more stories, and share it with someone who might need the reminder that their worth is not defined by what they give. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family or loved ones? What did you learn from it? And I'll leave you with this. What do you think is the real measure of love? What someone gives you, or how they see you?